Scott, good evening to you. There's a new tariff threat aimed at Canada, and the president is also insulting the Canadian Prime Minister, calling him Governor Carney.
In a post on Truth Social, President Trump wrote, "If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA."
Are you offended by being called governor?
Donald Trump has faced generals, billionaires, and heads of state. But there is one thing that consistently disarms him: silence backed by certainty. And on this particular day in Ottawa, Mark Carney walked into a press conference that was supposed to be about grocery prices and the cost of living for Canadians. Instead, it became a masterclass in psychological warfare. Following the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump had unleashed a barrage of threats, tariff warnings, personal insults, attempts to belittle Canadian leadership.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your prime minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
Every reporter in that room knew what was coming. They wanted to see if Carney would flinch. They wanted to know if he would rush to reassure Washington or quietly cave like so many leaders before him. He did neither. And what happened next reveals something critical about power. It's not always the loudest voice that wins. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to raise its voice at all. This is the story of how calm authority became Trump's kryptonite, and why what happened in that Ottawa press room matters far beyond Canada. The first question cuts straight to the bone. After Carney's speech in Davos and Trump's subsequent threats, reporters wanted to know, what impact did his words have on Canada-US relations? This is the moment where Trump usually wins. This is where leaders hedge their bets, soften their tone, issue carefully worded statements that mean nothing. Carney did the opposite. He didn't apologize. He didn't walk anything back. Instead, he delivered a line that strikes at the very core of Trump's entire platform. The world has changed.
Are you offended by being called governor?
I mean, I think in this role you get called a lot of things, a lot of time, and I'm not going to comment on every tweet or truth or comment from whoever. So I can handle it.
As a follow-up,
but I do think this point about our troops is fundamental, and respecting our troops and the contribution that they've made.
Now, on the surface, that sounds simple, almost obvious. But let's break down why those 4 words are so devastating. Trump's power comes from creating urgency. He thrives on making other leaders feel like they're reacting to him, like they're always one step behind, scrambling to keep up with his unpredictability. That's the game. Create chaos, force mistakes, dominate the narrative. But Carney flipped the script entirely. He noted that Canada recognized this shift months ago, not days ago, not in response to Trump's latest tweet, months ago. This is a strategic masterstroke because it tells Trump something he absolutely hates hearing. Your pressure didn't force this. You're late to the conversation. We were already preparing while you were still tweeting. By stating that Canada understood the scale of change in U.S. trade policy well before other countries, Carney signals control. He frames Canada's actions not as a panicked reaction to Trump's rhetoric, but as a calculated preparation that was already in motion. Think about what that does psychologically. Trump wants to be the disruptor, the one who forces everyone else to react. But here's Carney, calm as still water, essentially saying, "We saw you coming. We've been ready. You're not ahead of us." And that kind of response doesn't just deflect pressure, it reverses it. But Carney didn't stop there, because recognizing that the world has changed is one thing. Having a plan for it is another. And this is where his strategy becomes absolutely lethal. One of the most devastating parts of Carney's playbook is his focus on diversification. Now, why does this matter so much? Because Trump's leverage over Canada depends entirely on urgency and the feeling that Canada is boxed in. If Canada is dependent on a single market, Trump has veto power over Canada's economic future. He can threaten, and those threats have teeth. Carney explicitly removed that oxygen from the room. He highlighted 12 new trade and security agreements signed in just the last 6 months, partnerships spanning 4 different continents, a specific commitment to work closer with India.
Well, the first thing is that Canada respects our engagements, our commitments. Il y a des engagements dans l'ACM. We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy.
These aren't hypotheticals. These aren't talking points for future consideration. These are done deals, signed agreements, active partnerships. This wasn't just an economic footnote thrown in to sound productive. It was a warning shot. By openly discussing how Canada is becoming less dependent on the United States, Carney makes it clear that the U.S. no longer holds total veto power over Canada's economic destiny. And here's the crucial part. He delivered this with a measured tone and relaxed posture. No urgency, no panic, no defensive justification, just facts delivered calmly that fundamentally shift the power dynamic. The message to Washington is crystal clear. I'm not under pressure. You are. Because if you push too hard, if you actually follow through on these threats, you're not cornering Canada. You're accelerating Canada's pivot away from dependence on American markets. You're making our diversification strategy easier to sell domestically. You're giving us political cover to do what we were planning anyway. Diversification isn't about leaving the US. It's about making sure no one country can pull the emergency brake on Canada's future. Trump thrives on urgency because urgency forces mistakes. Urgency makes people negotiate from fear. But Carney projects patience, and patience is kryptonite to someone whose entire strategy depends on forcing quick, reactive decisions. When you refuse to be rushed, you take away the primary weapon in Trump's arsenal. Think about every major deal Trump has walked away from or threatened to blow up. The Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, NAFTA itself. In each case, his strategy was the same. Create a crisis, force urgency, make the other side believe they have no time to think. But what happens when the other side simply refuses to panic? What happens when they say, we've already thought this through, we've already built alternatives, take your time? The entire playbook collapses because urgency only works when both sides accept it as real. When one side steps back and says, actually, we're fine either way, the leverage evaporates. And that's exactly what Carney did. He demonstrated in real time that Canada has been building options while Trump was building tweets. Now let's talk about the moment that should have broken him. The moment designed to make Carney either apologize or look weak. The question about NATO and Afghanistan. Trump had suggested that NATO allies should have stepped back after Article 5 was invoked in Afghanistan, that they didn't really step up when it mattered. This is classic Trump. Rewrite history, create doubt, make allies question their own contributions. Most leaders faced with this would get emotional. They'd get defensive. They'd raise their voice, talk about sacrifice, maybe even get angry. Carney did something far more powerful. He lowered his voice, and he simply listed the facts. No emotion, no theatrics, just numbers. 40,000 Canadian troops served on the front lines in Afghanistan. They served for over 13 years, specifically in high-conflict areas like Kandahar, some of the most dangerous combat zones in the entire war. 158 Canadian soldiers paid the ultimate sacrifice. One Canadian diplomat also gave their life. Thousands more were wounded. 30 Canadian soldiers were awarded the American Bronze Star for courage in combat. Not the Canadian version, the American Bronze Star, awarded by the United States for exceptional bravery. There are moments in politics where emotion weakens an argument, and there are moments where facts end it. This was the latter. Carney delivered these numbers with a specific stiffness in his tone. Not anger, not defensiveness, just cold, documented reality. This is lethal in a political sense because it treats the NATO record as settled history, not a matter open for debate or reinterpretation. By highlighting that Canadians gave their lives to defend the United States after 9/11, that they stood shoulder to shoulder with American soldiers in the deadliest combat zones, Carney made Trump's rhetoric look not just wrong, but irrelevant, insulting even. He stood firmly for Canadian values and sacrifices, signaling that these contributions to liberty and freedom are a debt everyone, including any U.S. administration, should recognize. And he did it without raising his voice once. That's the power of stillness. Trump can't argue with numbers. He can't shout down documented sacrifice. He can't tweet his way around 158 coffins draped in Canadian flags. Let's be clear about what those numbers represent. 158 families that will never see their loved ones again. Thousands of soldiers who came home with physical and psychological wounds that will last a lifetime. Entire communities in Canada that felt the weight of that war for over a decade. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real people who answered the call when Article 5 was invoked. When the United States was attacked on September 11, 2001, NATO allies didn't hesitate. Canada didn't calculate the economic cost or run polls to see if it was popular. They sent troops. They sent them to the most dangerous places, and they kept them there for 13 years. So when Trump suggests that allies didn't step up, he's not just wrong. He's rewriting history in a way that dishonors genuine sacrifice. And Carney's refusal to let that stand, his quiet recitation of the facts, was one of the most powerful moments of the entire press conference. So what does Trump do instead? He goes personal. He starts calling Carney governor, a reference to his previous roles as governor of the Bank of England and Bank of Canada. On the surface, it's factually accurate, but the intent is clear: belittlement, diminishment, an attempt to make Carney sound like he's not a real political player, just some technocrat who doesn't understand the big leagues. When asked if he was offended by this, Carney's reaction was a masterclass in psychological dominance. He smiled, not a forced political smile, a genuine, relaxed smile. He simply stated that in his role, you get called a lot of things, and that he wasn't going to comment on every tweet or truth. Then he moved on. Let's pause here because this moment is critical. Insults only work if they change the target's behavior. They only have power if the person responds emotionally, gets defensive, tries to prove the insult wrong. Because when you do that, you validate the insult. You show it got under your skin. You give the insulter exactly what they want, a reaction. By not changing a single thing about his demeanor, by continuing with the same calm authority, Carney rendered the insult powerless. Trump thrives on confrontation. He thrives on shouting matches. He thrives on emotional reactions because those create chaos, and chaos is his home turf. By denying Trump all three, Carney projects something far more dangerous to a disruptor: inevitability. While Trump wants urgency and submission, Carney projects patience and preparation. This kind of certainty is what unnerves Trump the most. You cannot dominate someone who refuses to play your game. You cannot bully someone who won't acknowledge the bully. And you definitely can't throw someone off balance who's already decided exactly where they're standing. Think about it from Trump's perspective. He's used to people either fighting back loudly, which gives him a media battle to dominate, or people quietly caving, which gives him a win. Carney did neither. He just kept building Canada's position, kept diversifying partnerships, kept speaking in that same measured tone. It's like trying to punch smoke. There's nothing to hit. This is where the psychology gets really interesting. Trump's brand is built on being unpredictable, on keeping everyone off balance. But unpredictability only works as a strategy if the other side needs predictability from you. If they've already prepared for multiple scenarios, if they've built their plans to work regardless of what you do, then your unpredictability becomes irrelevant. It's the difference between someone saying, "I need to know what you're going to do so I can plan," versus someone saying, "Whatever you decide will be fine." One gives you power, the other takes it away. The authorities, the intent did. But Carney didn't ignore Trump entirely. He acknowledged the upcoming formal review of the KSMA, the trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. He even called Trump a strong negotiator. On the surface, this might seem like deference, but listen to the framing. He acknowledges that much of the current posturing should be viewed in the context of that upcoming negotiation. Translation: this isn't personal. This isn't emotional. This is positioning before a negotiation. I see what you're doing, and I'm not taking the bait. This shows that Carney isn't just reacting to the noise. He's looking at the broader context of trade and power. He's focusing on what Canada can actually control, building strength at home, diversifying partners abroad, strengthening national resilience. Not what Trump tweets, not what Trump threatens, but what Canada can build regardless of what Washington does. And here's why that matters. Trump's strategy depends on making the other side feel like they have no options, like they need the deal more than he does, like walking away isn't possible. Carney's entire approach is designed to communicate the opposite. We have options. We're building more options every day. We'd prefer to work with you, but we don't need to work with you. There's a massive difference between those two positions. When you need something, you negotiate from weakness. When you have alternatives, you negotiate from strength. Carney just spent an entire press conference laying out Canada's alternatives. 12 new agreements, 4 continents, closer ties with India, a diversified trade strategy that's already in motion. That's not a threat, that's not bluster, that's documented reality, and it completely changes the negotiation dynamic for the KSMA review. Because now Trump has to consider, if I push too hard, if I actually impose these tariffs, if I actually try to renegotiate from a position of pure dominance, what happens? Canada doesn't collapse. Canada accelerates its pivot to other markets. American exporters lose access to a major market. American businesses that depend on Canadian supply chains get disrupted. And for what? To prove a point? Let's talk about what those disruptions would actually look like. Canada is the largest export market for 36 US states. Canadian and American supply chains are deeply integrated, especially in manufacturing and energy. Parts cross the border multiple times during production. A tariff war doesn't just hurt Canada, It hurts American workers, American factories, American businesses. Trump knows this. He's not stupid. But his strategy depends on the other side blinking first, on them being so afraid of disruption that they give in before things get real. Carney's calm authority doesn't just protect Canada's position. It exposes the limits of Trump's leverage. And that's why it's kryptonite. Because Trump's power is mostly perception. It's the belief that he'll actually do the crazy thing, that he'll blow everything up if he doesn't get his way. But when someone calmly demonstrates they're prepared for exactly that scenario, the threat loses its teeth. There's a deeper lesson here about power that goes beyond trade agreements and political posturing. Real authority doesn't need volume. It doesn't need theatrics. It doesn't need to constantly remind everyone it's in the room. Real authority is quiet because it's certain. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need reactions. It just is. And that's exactly what we saw in Ottawa. This press conference wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was devastating. It showed a leader who refuses to flinch in the face of provocation. Mark Carney answered the serious questions and ignored the noise. In doing so, he reminded everyone watching who was actually in control of the room. Not the person making threats from another country. The person standing calmly at the podium, listing facts, outlining strategy, and refusing to be moved. This wasn't just a political briefing. It was a display of authority. The kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that Trump, for all his bluster and bravado, has never quite mastered. Because authority isn't about forcing people to react to you. It's about being so certain of your position that reactions become irrelevant. In a room built for noise, Mark Carney chose stillness. And stillness won. The strategic brilliance of this approach can't be overstated. Every element worked together. The refusal to apologize, the documentation of alternatives, the quiet recitation of sacrifice, the dismissal of personal attacks without dismissing them loudly. Each piece reinforced the others. Each calm statement built a wall that Trump's usual tactics couldn't penetrate. And perhaps most importantly, Carney demonstrated something that other leaders struggling with Trump should pay attention to. You don't beat chaos by creating more chaos. You don't beat noise by being louder. You beat it by refusing to participate in the game entirely, by staying focused on substance while others chase spectacle, by building real alternatives while others issue empty threats. This matters because we're living in an era where political theater often drowns out actual governance, where the loudest voice in the room is assumed to be the most powerful, where creating controversy is mistaken for creating results. Carney's approach is a reminder that there's another way, that calm, prepared, substantive leadership can be more effective than all the tweets and rallies and staged confrontations in the world. It's not flashy. It doesn't make for great television, but it works. And in the long run, it builds something far more durable than fear or chaos ever could: actual credibility. This story between Ottawa and Washington is far from over. The KSMA review is coming. Trump's tariff threats may or may not materialize. More tweets will come. More press conferences will happen. But what we witnessed in Ottawa set a template. It showed that there's a way to deal with unpredictable aggression that doesn't involve either submission or escalation. A third path: preparation, diversification, and unshakable calm. Whether that strategy ultimately succeeds in protecting Canadian interests remains to be seen. Trade wars are complicated. Political dynamics shift. Economic forecasts change. But what cannot be denied is that Carney walked out of that press conference having given up nothing, having shown no weakness, and having demonstrated that Canada is building a position of strength regardless of what Washington decides to do. That's not just good politics. That's good strategy. And it's exactly the kind of approach that makes bullies reconsider whether their usual tactics will work. Because at the end of the day, bullies depend on fear. They depend on the target believing they have no choice but to comply. But when the target calmly demonstrates they've built choices, when they show they've prepared for every scenario, when they refuse to be rushed or rattled or intimidated, the bully loses the only real power they had: the power to control the other person's emotional state. Carney never gave Trump that power, not for a second, and that's the real story here, not the specific trade deals or tariff numbers or diplomatic language. The real story is about how you maintain your authority when someone is actively trying to strip it away, how you stay focused on your goals when someone is actively trying to distract you, how you build real power when someone is busy performing power. Trump negotiates through pressure. Carney negotiates through preparation, and in the long game, only one of these approaches builds something that lasts. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this analysis is based on public information, historical context, and my own perspective on political strategy. It's not a call to action, not an instruction, and not a claim about anyone's hidden intentions. It's simply one interpretation of a complex, fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can look at these same facts and reach different conclusions, and that's not just acceptable. It's essential to healthy public discourse. No matter where you stand politically, no matter which side of any border you're on, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, and peace without fear or hate. You're welcome to share your own perspective in the comments respectfully and thoughtfully. Thank you for watching and for thinking critically about power, strategy, and the moments that shape how nations talk to each other. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives into the events that matter.